girls, it's Mrs. Smiley. I hope you're having a wonderful day today. We're getting closer and closer to Halloween, which will be on Saturday. So I'm excited to see what you all look like when you come to our little party on Friday together at 1 o'clock. Okay, I wanted to read you this story. It's called The Biggest Pumpkin Ever. And this is a really cute story. I want you to look at the picture, and I want you to look at the characters that are on this front cover. Now, after you see all these little characters here, do you think this is a real story about real facts of a nonfiction book? Or do you think it's a fiction story, something that's kind of make-believe and fun fiction? Probably a fiction story. Whenever we see animals who are in clothes or talking or acting and have mannerisms like people do, then it's probably a phony baloney fiction story, a fun fiction story. And that is what this is going to be. It says The Biggest Pumpkin Ever. And this is written by Stephen Kroll, and it's illustrated by Jenny Bassett. So really cute pictures in here too. Here's our title page, The Biggest Pumpkin Ever. Oh, there it is again. Okay, put your listening ears on, boys and girls. I'm going to put my reading glasses on. Whoop, if I don't put myself, and here we go. Once there were two mice who fell in love with the same pumpkin. I don't see them in this picture, but maybe we'll see them on this page. Clayton, the house mouse, noticed it one day in the vegetable garden. It was still little and green, but Clayton thought that he could make it grow really big. I might even get it big enough to win the grand prize at the town pumpkin contest. There's the little pumpkin, and look what he's thinking. Using his imagination, isn't he? Desmond, the field mouse, discovered the pumpkin the same day. He thought that if he helped it grow, it could become the biggest jack-o'-lantern in the neighborhood. There's Desmond, and he sees the little pumpkin. That afternoon, Clayton watered the pumpkin. He also mixed up some fertilizer of manure and water. He spread the mixture around the pumpkin to make it grow larger. So now I want you to look at this picture. Here's Clayton, and he's putting this special dirt with manure in it, so it's got a lot of nutrients for the plants all around the plant. And then I want you to see who's out here flying a kite. It's Desmond, is it? Do you think they even know that they like the same pumpkin? Make a prediction. The very same night, Desmond went into the garden and he watered the pumpkin too. He also spread some manure mixed with water around it. So he's taking care of the same pumpkin too. The next day, Clayton watered and fertilized the pumpkin again. The next night, Desmond did the same. And the pumpkin began to grow. Look at it. It's getting bigger and bigger, isn't it? By the end of the month, the pumpkin was so large, Clayton couldn't believe his eyes. My goodness, said Clayton's mother, and it's not even full grown. Clayton shrugged. All I do is water it, he said. Clayton's mother whispered in his ear, if you want the pumpkin to grow bigger faster, you should use sugar water. Never heard of that. That night, Desmond brought his brother Morris to see the pumpkin. Morris knew everything there was to know about growing things. That's some pumpkin, he said. Desmond shrugged. All I do is water it, he said. Morris whispered in his ear, you should try using sugar water, he said. That must be a trick to get them to grow big. Do you think they're ever going to run into each other visiting the pumpkin? We'll find out. The next day, Clayton dug a small hole beside the pumpkin vine, and in the hole he placed a bowl full of sugar water. He cut it into the vines a few inches from the pumpkin, And in the cut, he put one end of a piece of candle wick, and then he put the other in a bowl of sugar water. So can you see what he did here? He kind of cut the edge, and he's got a little candle wick, a little thread going from the sugar water up into the pumpkin vine. Then that night, on the other side of the pumpkin, Desmond did exactly the same thing. So boys and girls, here's Clayton's little bowl of sugar water, and here's Desmond's little bowl of sugar water. Within a week, the pumpkin was twice the size it had been. Within 2 weeks, it was absolutely enormous. How big it got. Clayton was amazed. He ran down the road and he peeked into his friend Jimmy's pumpkin patch. The pumpkin Jimmy was growing for the contest looked much smaller. Clayton scratched his head. "I have an amazing pumpkin," he said out loud, "and I think I'm going to win the contest." Look at Jimmy's pumpkin. It's not very big. It's a nice pumpkin, but it's not near as big as theirs. That night, Desmond and his brother Morris spent a long time looking at the pumpkin. "How do you think it got that big?" Desmond asked. Morris shrugged. "A little luck, a little skill." "It's going to make some jack-o'-lanterns," said Desmond. "It sure is," said Morris. So now wait, they want to do two different things. So think in the story. What did Clayton want to make the pumpkin into? He wants to enter it in the contest, but Desmond wants to cut it and make it into a jack-o'-lantern. Okay, let's see what happens here. A week later, Clayton noticed the pumpkin was bigger than the family car. During the day, everyone he knew came to admire it. At night, all the field mice gathered round to do exactly the same thing. So up here you have Clayton's family and friends, and down here you have Desmond's family and friends looking at it. By now, summer was almost over. In a week, the pumpkin would be full grown and start turning yellowish and then orange. And a few weeks after that, it would be ripe and ready for the pumpkin contest. Clayton could hardly wait. The pumpkin was growing so fast, it would soon be larger than his house. Then he had a terrible thought. If the pumpkin was so big, how would he get it to the contest? It wouldn't fit in his red wagon. It wouldn't even fit in a truck. Clayton decided to worry about this when the time came. So look at Clayton's house. Now look how big the pumpkin is. By now, summer, oh, wait a minute. Forgot to turn the page, sorry. Oh, look at this picture. Who's on one side of it and who's on the other? That night, the weather grew colder, and thinking there might be an early frost, Clayton rushed out to the pumpkin with his blanket. One was not enough. Soon he was rushing back and forth, carrying all the blankets from the house. As he worked, he hummed a little song, and as he hummed, he heard someone else singing. Who was singing? Make a prediction. As he worked, he hummed a little tune, and as he hummed, he heard someone else singing. He also began to realize that somebody else was covering the pumpkin with blankets. There's Desmond. Desmond, too, had seen the danger of the early frost. He, too, had brought blankets for the pumpkin, and as he worked, he sang a little song. And as he sang, he began to realize that someone else was working and humming, too. It was Clayton, wasn't it? Now, do you think they're going to be happy to see each other or unhappy to see each other, sad? Let's find out. Clayton stopped humming and he put down his pile of blankets and he peered around the corner of the pumpkin. Desmond stopped singing. He put down his blankets and he peered around the corner of the pumpkin. The two of them bumped heads and fell down. "You've been feeding the pumpkin," said Clayton. "You've been feeding the pumpkin," said Desmond. "That's why it got so big," said Clayton. "That's why it got so big," said Desmond. They burst out laughing. That's a good surprise, isn't it? When everything had been explained, Clayton said, "I know I'll win the contest if I can get the pumpkin to town." Desmond smiled. "I'll help you. Just let me carve the pumpkin into a jack-o'-lantern for Halloween when the contest is over." "It's a deal," said Clayton. "It's a deal," said Desmond, and they shook on it. That means they shook hands. And before COVID, we shook hands with each other. The morning of the contest was bright and sunny, and mice were bringing their pumpkins to the town square by truck, car, and wagon. Some were rolling them along the ground. Look, it says pumpkin contest. Can you see all the different mice? Hey, look at this one. It's on the top of the car in a truck. They're rolling it on wagons, carrying. Everybody's bringing their, well, that's a big one, bringing their pumpkins in for the contest. How do you think they're gonna get Clayton and Desmond's pumpkin there? Okay, here you go. Look at this picture and look who's up on the tippy top of it. Can you see two mice up there, Desmond and Clayton? Suddenly, they all stopped short. Over the fields came the biggest pumpkin anyone had ever seen. It was being pulled by 100 field mice on motorcycles. Look at all the mice on motorcycles. They're pulling that pumpkin. When the pumpkin reached town, it was too big for any of the streets. Clayton had to explain why they couldn't bring it into the town square. Now I want to open this up so you can see the picture a little better. It looks like they have a little cart that they built with some wheels, and then all of those motorcycles were pulling that pumpkin. It says the mayor understood at once. He led the crowd to the giant pumpkin and pinned the first prize ribbon on its side. Then everyone danced around it. "Who would have believed this?" said Clayton as he danced. "Who would have believed this?" said Desmond at the same moment. See the friends right here? There they are celebrating together. That means they're really happy. Oh, here's now what was their promise? What are they doing? Use your picture clues to help you. Can you see all the seeds laying over here that they had to take out of the inside of it too? And there's the top, and here's the design. It looks like Desmond has drawn up for that pumpkin. They're turning it into his jack-o'-lantern. When the celebration was over, the 100 field mice pulled the pumpkin back to the field. The day before Halloween, they carved it into the best jack-o'-lantern ever. Ooh, how cool would this be? Look at it sitting on top of the hill and all the mice dancing around it. It says, "And on Halloween night, its wonderful smiling face could be seen glowing for miles around." And then you see our little friends in the front here. What a fun Halloween story. The biggest pumpkin ever. It was so nice to see that these two boys, I was kind of worried in the beginning of the story. I thought, oh, I hope they don't get mad. I hope they don't fight over the pumpkin. They laughed and they were like, that's how it got so big. Because there's somebody else doing all those wonderful things for the pumpkin too as it was growing, giving it more food, sugar water and good soil and watering it and taking care of it. And they realized it was all that extra love and attention that little pumpkin got that helped it to grow bigger and bigger and then enormous. So it was nice to see that the friends were so happy to see each other and that they had done this together without even knowing it. And then they agreed on what to do with the pumpkin. It was very nice because Clayton really wanted it in the contest and Desmond was like, sure. And then Desmond really wanted it to be a jack-o'-lantern and Clayton said, sure, we can do that too. So it was nice to see friends being kind to each other and agreeing and compromising and making decisions together. How nice that can be. So I hope you enjoyed our story, The Biggest Pumpkin Ever. Maybe you can draw a great big pumpkin to go along with this story. So I will see you later, boys and girls. Thanks for being such good listeners.